How good can a healthy Hunter Harvey be for the Royals bullpen? I'll give you my thoughts next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It's another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jac Johnson. You can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can also find us on wherever you listen to podcasts. That can be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, and it's fitting with the NCAA tournament just about 4 or 5 hours away from when I'm recording this episode. And you can know that right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when that first $5 bet wins. So get started today over at FanDuel. And for the first-time listeners, before we get things started today, if you want to know how this podcast works, who I am, we bring you 5 episodes a week, and tomorrow we'll be doing our Mailbag Friday. If I'm not able to get an episode up, which I know that goes against the 5 episodes a week, I will be traveling. I'm going to try to get that episode out early by 5 or 6 a.m. tomorrow. But send in a question to my Twitter handle, which is at JOHNYJ_15, or just leave them right below this YouTube video. Very easy for me to get the notification, and I will reference your question in tomorrow's episode, assuming that I do get one out tomorrow morning before I head off for travel. And as for me, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, do a variety of things over here. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Last night, the Royals took on the Giants in one of their final spring training games. Early next week, they're going to head to Arlington and take on the Rangers for a two-game series, a little exhibition showdown that they had even last year, I believe it was. Might have been 2 years running. The Royals have had this exhibition showdown in Arlington. I'm not sure yet who's going to be starting in those games. All we know is it's not going to be Cole Reagans because he's starting on opening day. I'd imagine then it's Lorenzen and Bubic because those would be the number 4 and number 5 guys in the rotation. But that's a segment for a different day. Today, we're going to be talking about the health of Hunter Harvey. Man, does he look good in spring training. We will dive into that rotation. It appears that the Royals are going to go with Kris Bubic to start the year over Daniel Lynch. And lastly, I mean, even though he was assigned to minor league camp, Jac Caglianone is still doing Jac Caglianone things, which yesterday in the AAA game for the Royals, he hit one about 550 feet. It seemed like over the batter's eye in center field. He's just a different type of prospect and one that the Royals simply have not had before. But we'll get to that in the final portion of today's show. For the first segment, I want to dive into Hunter Harvey a little bit and what we've seen this spring, what I talked about with him going back to about a month ago on his health, and what you can expect from him going into 2025. It's no secret, and JJ Piccolo even, referenced it on the broadcast last night, that just Hunter Harvey wasn't healthy when he was a Royal. He was dealing with this, back injury in the middle portion of his back, not being able to rotate as well. And that's what I talked about with him down in Surprise was, the typical question, how are you feeling? Are you close to 100%? Yeah, no issues there. Well, what was it? What were you dealing with? It was a injury that tightened up in the middle of my back so you can't rotate too well. I was still impressed he was able to throw upper 90s dealing with that injury. But we can recall that in September, he was trying to get ramped back up. They were having him throw live bullpen sessions. He was throwing simulated games. None of it was responding well. And he didn't get healthy enough in time to pitch in the postseason. So the best course of action was give him the entire offseason, rest up a little bit, and then we'll try things again in spring training. And I was a little bit concerned going into spring training that, maybe that could pop up. This is well before I got to Surprise, just because those back injuries are tricky. If that's something that's been bothering you and it was something that flared up throughout the season, who's to say it couldn't flare up early on in spring training? And Hunter Harvey was one of those guys that was going to make the team. you just wanted to see him have a very strong camp. And he's done that. He's now thrown 7 shutout, or maybe give up 1 run. I believe in his first or second outing, he gave up a run. But 7 innings, 1 run given up, barely dealing with any base runners. The most encouraging part of his slash line, whatever you want to call it, when we term a pitcher slash line there, even though this doesn't fall into that category, he hasn't walked anybody just yet. He's striking out a good bit. He hasn't walked anybody just yet. And that was when you saw the injury go sideways for him, was the lack of command. Hunter Harvey, even with his velocity, has been able to throw a lot of strikes in his big league career. That was not a concern when the Royals traded for him when he was in Washington. And I want to say we highlighted this when they put Hunter Harvey on the IL, because it was one of my concerns when they traded for him. And it was that Washington really overused him in the first half. And everybody's going to have their different expectations of a big league season. The Nationals are not operating based off what the Royals are wanting Hunter Harvey to be in the second half. They might not even known that the Royals were interested in Hunter Harvey until the deadline. But with Kyle Finnegan in the back end of that Nationals bullpen, and Hunter Harvey's a setup guy, anytime they had a lead, they were going to those guys. And right before the trade deadline, Hunter Harvey had really torpedoed. It just had gotten away from him. He looked fatigued, and it's easy to see why he was fatigued. Because in the first 3 years of his big league career in Baltimore, he never threw more than 10 innings. Not bad numbers, but you only put together about 24, 25 innings. In fact, it was 23 2/3 innings. He goes to Washington. He throws 39 1/3 innings in his first year in Washington. That was over the course of 38 games. And then with Washington in the first half last year, this is what stood out to me. So he had thrown 60 2/3 over the course of an entire 2023. And I've brought up this stat before. In the first half of the Washington, he threw 45 innings. So you're talking about 60 over the course, or let's say 61, because it was 60 2/3, and then it was 45 2/3. He had thrown 73% of his 2023 output in the first half with Washington. It's no surprise why he only threw 5 2/3 for the Royals. He was worn out. He was burned out. And the Royals still took a chance on that with the hopes that in a different role, not using him every single night, he could be able to get back to form. Didn't happen, dealt with the back injury. And the reason they took a chance on him, too, is that he had an extra year of control. If it didn't work out, you still had another year of maybe good 7th inning, 8th inning pitching. A good setup man you could turn to late in a 1-run game. And in spring training so far, you are seeing the Hunter Harvey that was in Washington in 2023. You are seeing that version of him. His splitter looks incredibly sharp. His fastball was well located last night. It was getting some ugly swings. And when you already have Lucas Erceg out there in the bullpen, he threw last night, looked pretty good as well. Carlos Estevez out there. He's still building things back up. The velocity was down a little bit. It's something to keep an eye on, that's for sure. I'd imagine that in this final 5, 6, 7 game stretch they have in spring training, you want to get him out there for 2 more games. And if he's still at 92, 94 by the time they leave Arlington, that could be concerning. That maybe he needs to get built back up a little bit more before you would have him in the back end of your bullpen. But for Harvey, that gives you some insurance if the good version of Harvey is in that bullpen. Spring training isn't everything. However, the velocity looks good. The command looks good. The ability to set guys up in spring training gives you some confidence. That was one of the issues I saw with Hunter Harvey in his short time with the Royals last year, falling behind a lot of hitters. Now, that splitter is his best pitch. He knows that. Everybody in the Royals organization knows that that splitter is the 2-strike put-away pitch. You can't use it effectively if you're falling behind everybody. And the fastball becomes hittable if you're missing with the first 2 pitches and it's 2-0. Okay, I'm ruling out the splitter if I'm a hitter. And it feels like he's not going to throw the slider, just have the hunch that a 2-0 slider is not coming, so you sit on the fastball and you can crush it. It happened against the White Sox last year. It happened against the Red Sox, if I'm not mistaken. And it happened most notably in Detroit when the Royals blew that game in extra innings. But to get ahead of hitters, 0-2, 1-2, it sets up that splitter, and you still have to be worried about the slider or the fastball. And this goes the same with every pitcher. You don't want to fall behind because then the hitter can really dwindle it down to what pitch you're going to throw. But when his command is on, which it was the majority of his career, that's when you can use that devastating splitter to put away a lot of guys. And if he's healthy, if spring training can translate, which it doesn't always, but if it translates into the regular season, the Royals have a really nice piece for the back end of their bullpen. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, it appears that Matt Quatraro has made his choice as to who to go with as the number 5 starter in the Royals organization. Kris Bubic over Daniel Lynch. I believe it's the right selection. I'll tell you why next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. We have 2 sponsors we want to give a shout out to. The first, beginning with Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives business flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you're in need of extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com, UPWORK.com. That's Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Don't waste any time. Get started with Upwork. Also want to tell you about FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. That's FanDuel.com. Go get started today. And as I mentioned to open up the show, the NCAA tournament is beginning in about 3 or 4 hours from when I'm recording this podcast. That's what a lot of people are going to be doing all day long, whether you're at work, whether you're at school, whether you're just at home or at a bar, you are watching March Madness. For my pick, I'm going to stick my neck out there a little bit. I say Creighton beats Louisville and Lexington is the 8-9 matchup in that first game. Can't wait for it to get started, though. There's no better time of the year with baseball right around the corner and the NCAA tournament in full swing. Last night before the game, this was per Annie Rogers, and I want to make sure I pull this up here and get the exact quote for everybody. But it appears the Royals have made their selection as to who to go with for the number 5 spot in the Royals rotation. My pick, going back to roughly 3 months ago, or maybe it was less than that because they hadn't picked up Michael Lorenzen just yet, but you had Cole Reagans, Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha, Michael Lorenzen, Kris Bubic. I didn't waver too much on Kris Bubic being in that number 5 spot for a few different reasons. Number 1, Alec Marsh was not healthy, and he's still building back up, and with less than a week to go before spring training wraps up, it is exactly 1 week from today that the Royals will be taking on the Guardians on opening day. He's not going to be ready. Certainly not ready to compete for a rotation spot. Kyle Wright, same boat. He just wasn't healthy enough in spring training, was working back through that hamstring injury. But it appears all things are good to go. In fact, per Annie Rogers with both these guys, she said that Alec Marsh got in his first game action of the year yesterday with 2 ups in a minor league game. He's on normal spring training buildup now, barring setbacks. So this will be a couple of weeks to get him back into the swing of things and then probably send him to Omaha for some live game work. With Kyle Wright, he's scheduled to face hitters for the first time in a live BP today. So, yes, Kyle Wright is still a little bit of a ways away. That's not too concerning because I really didn't believe he was going to win the job with a healthy camp. Yes, you can fall in love with what he did in 2022, but that's a long time ago now we're talking about. That's 3 years ago, the last time Kyle Wright was a big-time contributor at the big league level. If I was to go over the home run leaders or the RBI leaders in 2022, you'd see some names that surprise you. You'd be surprised with who was still playing in baseball back then. 3 years can be a pretty big gap between now and 2025 when you look at some of the players that were there and who Kyle Wright was dominating at the plate. It's not 10 years ago, but still, 3 years is a noticeable time difference when you are trying to pick your number 5 starter for the rotation. But when it comes to Kris Bubic and Daniel Lynch, here is what Matt Quatraro had to say. So Daniel Lynch going into last night was only going to throw 1 inning. He actually didn't pitch that well. He got the loss, gave up 2 in the 9th. Michael Wacha was great, struck out 8 over 5, struck out the side twice, actually in his first inning of work and his last inning of work. Hunter Harvey, as we just talked about, looked really good. Lucas Erceg worked around a 2-out walk. John Schreiber was very effective as well, and Daniel Lynch didn't have his best stuff. But it was the first time in camp he was only slated to throw 1 inning. And Matt Quatraro said, who Kris Bubic is slated to start today, by the way, as of right now, that's where he'll stay in the rotation for the rest of spring. Without exactly saying Kris Bubic is in our number 5 spot, he just said Kris Bubic is in our number 5 spot. And it's the right move. This is why I was pro Kris Bubic in the rotation. Because one, I've said that now, I've gone after a couple of lists here in this segment. Matt Quatraro never really gave the indication that it was going to be open competition, or at least I didn't get that feel that Matt Quatraro was going to be evaluating 4 or 5 different guys for the number 5 spot. My biggest takeaway down in surprise when I talked with Kris Bubic was that the Royals were having him stretch out in the offseason. And in fact, they never really entertained him going back to the bullpen. It was simply, what you did was great last year. We want you to start stretching out. And even when he was in the bullpen, it was, hey, you're going to be more of a long reliever here. He just dominated in a setup role, took that role and ran with it, not just because he was great there. It was because the Royals didn't have a very deep bullpen. They didn't have many guys who could get outs in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning, not until Lucas Erceg came along. So you have him stretch out this offseason. He comes into camp stretched out. He stays stretched out in camp. He's starting every game that he is lined up to pitch, or he is pitching multiple innings, piggybacking the starter, which is how they do it sometimes in spring training. My question would have been, why would you have him stretched out for the entirety of the offseason, for the entirety of spring training, only to pick Daniel Lynch? Daniel Lynch might have been stretched out this offseason. We've also seen Daniel Lynch succeed in a role that he's never been able to do before at the big league level. Not in the rotation, not as an opener, not as a 1-inning guy. He really thrived as that Swiss Army knife. And that's an incredibly valuable role, by the way. I hope Daniel Lynch doesn't take it as I've been demoted, I'm not good enough. Now I'm thrown in as the spot starter guy who throws in blowout games. It's not that. There's going to be games where the Royals turn to Daniel Lynch when they're up 3 and they need 2 or 3 innings out of him. That is very much a possibility for the Royals as early as April. We saw it mainly in September because you rely on your bullpen pretty heavily in that final month of the season because the rotation is so tired, and especially last year because the rotation worked a lot of innings. Some years the bullpen's taxed and the rotation's fresh because the bullpen's thrown in the majority of the innings. But Daniel Lynch is going to be an incredibly valuable piece to this Royals bullpen. Why it's a good move for Kris Bubic is that if it doesn't work out, you know he can pitch out of the bullpen. We've seen that. And as much as we liked Kris Bubic in the bullpen, the Royals went out there and replaced Kris Bubic with a guy who was a top reliever on the open market. Carlos Estevez is somebody that is an upgrade over Kris Bubic in the bullpen when he's healthy. He's got more experience there. He can pitch in the 8th. He can pitch in the 9th. For Kris Bubic, it was the 7th or the 8th. You weren't throwing him out there to close out too many games unless you absolutely had to. But for Bubic, if it doesn't work out, he's back in the bullpen, an extra arm there. if it does work out, there is a lot of upside to the number 5 spot in the rotation. Maybe upside you didn't even have last year. I mean, Kris Bubic can be much better than what Alec Marsh was for the Royals. He can be much better than what Lorenzen was in that spot when they acquired him. Now, I know Lorenzen's in the number 4 spot. Is he going to be as good or better than Brady Singer? That's the dice roll for this rotation. I feel pretty much good about everybody else for the Lorenzen. We'll have to wait and see on that. I feel with the experience and being a veteran that his pitchability, how to work through, grind through starts is better than Brady Singer's, where we saw Brady Singer implode from time to time. I'm not sure we're going to see too many implosions from Michael Lorenzen. Maybe we don't see as many 7-inning shutouts that Brady Singer tossed. That inconsistency, though, did wear, at least on me, when we got to July and August, where you didn't know what you were going to get from Brady Singer. If you get 5 innings and 3 runs from Michael Lorenzen every single time out, I can take it. He's the number 4 starter. For Bubic, though, you got the upside of having a lot of swing and miss. He's a big spin rate pitcher. His command's gotten a lot better. He throws a lot of pitches. That's the upside there. If you can build him up to be that 6-inning guy again, this is the right move. If it doesn't work out, you still have a good reliever. That's the thing with Daniel Lynch. If you tried out Daniel Lynch and he was a starter and it didn't go well, and you move into the bullpen, all you're getting out of the bullpen is the Swiss Army knife guy. And maybe he is the same pitcher, maybe he's not. But with Kris Bubic, we know that in a very high leverage role, he succeeded, and in the postseason last year. But the ceiling for Kris Bubic is in the rotation. That's what I want to make clear here. If you can get 80% of what he did in the bullpen and translate it to the rotation, it is the right move. Now, I don't know exactly which game he will start to open up the year. He would be the number 5 guy, and the Royals have an off day on that Friday right after opening day, so they theoretically could skip him until the next series against, who would it be? Baltimore, I believe it is. Yeah, they've got that 3-game series, in Milwaukee. You'd have Reagans go on Thursday. Then you'd have Lugo Saturday, Waka Sunday. Then you could go Lorenzen on Monday to open up things in Milwaukee. And then you go back to Reagans, Lugo. So, yeah, you're probably thinking that weekend series against Baltimore is when Kris Bubic would make his official season debut and back in the rotation for the first time since 2023. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, Jac Caglianone, even though he's no longer in big league camp, is still doing very impressive things. We'll tell you about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find us on wherever you listen to your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Not that I'm surprised that Jac Caglianone was able to turn some heads, make people awe in the massive moonshots he's been putting down there in Surprise, and just the prospect that he's become. People are marveling at it. And whether he's in big league camp or he's in minor league camp, that wasn't going to change. Like I said, it didn't surprise me. But yesterday's video, to me, is starting to show that all these fantasies that people have about Jac Caglianone making a fast track to the big leagues, it's going to pick up steam quicker than maybe even I expect, right? Because big league camp, it is still spring training, and the same thing goes for minor league camp. And what he was able to do in spring training, as we all know, was incredibly impressive. He was the best hitter in camp with the amount of at-bats they gave him. And that put him on the radar as not just the number 1 prospect in the Royals organization, maybe one of the top 10 prospects in all of baseball. He's listed at 22. He's starting to look like the next power hitter of the decade. He's starting to look like the guy that when he comes up to the plate, he can hit it 120 miles an hour, 480 feet from home plate. He's just got that look to him. Not just because he's 6'5", 240 pounds. I mean, he's a big kid, but it's the swing, it's the sound off the bat. And yesterday, this home run he had off of a Cleveland Guardian AAA pitcher, I didn't get the name on him, but he goes dead center. Nobody moves. It's hit likely 460 feet. Just absolutely crushed it. And though it is a continuation of spring training, it's starting to make you believe that when he goes down to AA or AAA, it appears that it is AA now that I think about it, because the Royals reporters put it out there that that's where he's going to go to begin the year. It is very possible now, where I didn't have this belief even when he left big league camp, that he was going to go down there and just make a mockery the minute he showed up. And when I mean make a mockery, it's that these AA guys look like JV high school pitchers. I didn't get that sense that it was going to happen, because still there are good prospects you're facing. And yes, he saw a couple of them in surprise when he was in big league camp. He saw a couple of big leaguers. It's just not always the same to translate spring training success in surprise into the regular season. And when Jac Caglianone goes down to AA, he'll have that immense pressure of people are expecting you to be up in Kansas City sooner rather than later. And that's a lot to put on somebody that was drafted last summer. Let us not get lost on that. He was drafted last summer. So he's barely had any time to develop in the Royals organization. He spent a little time in Quad Cities. He played in the Arizona Fall League, and then he's been in big league camp. Maybe that's a lot to you. For the typical prospect, that's not a lot of time. But yesterday, to see the distance on this ball, I mean, it's very clear there's nobody else in the minor league system that has that type of power. Doesn't come close. There may not be anybody on the big league roster next to Bobby Witt Jr. that can hit a ball as far as Jac Caglianone can. Salvador Perez, at his age now, I would need to see it. He can run into one at 440. Jac Caglianone's somebody that can run into 475, 480. You put him at Coors Field, he might get damn close to 500. And when going down to the minor league system, I would have thought that the reason he would struggle a little bit and maybe have his ups and downs, as a young player does in AA, it would be due to all this pressure, that he knows what's being said about him and how Royals fans want him to be there on opening day, and he doesn't need any more time in AA or AAA because he's got enough seasoning. He showed in camp he was good enough to compete at the big league level. I thought that maybe that pressure would get to him a little bit, and in baseball we see that all the time. If you put that type of pressure on a player, they maybe don't crumble under it. They just fall back down to earth a little bit. And it wouldn't surprise me if that happens. I mean, he is a 21, 22-year-old player. It's older than some prospects out there. And he did play in the SEC. He was a two-way player, though I just expect him to hit for the Royals in his career. Maybe he gets on the mound once or twice, but they know he's on the doorstep now, and it's been purely because of his offensive abilities. Now it appears that he's that guy that loves pressure. That's my favorite thing that I interviewed Bobby Witt Jr. about, which was all this pressure, being an MVP candidate, people expecting you to be the face of the franchise. He embraces it. He wants it, and it's made him a better player. With Jac Caglianone, it's almost the same thing. From the time he was at Florida, he has had that pressure of being one of the faces of college baseball. Then he's a top 10 pick in the Major League Baseball draft. He is known for this big-time power, mammoth power, and he's lived up to it. You know, in big league camp, if he would have had one home run and he went 2 for 12, you still would have had a lot to be excited about. You saw the power. He was in big league camp with his first opportunity, and he did a little bit with it. The fact he did that much, and then you send him to minor league camp, and he's doing this again, now the wheels are starting to spin that maybe he loves this pressure. Maybe he loves the idea of being expected to be up there in the first half of the season. I mean, he was interviewed when he got sent down. It was, and I don't even want to say sent down because it's just assigned to minor league camp. He wasn't demoted by any means. But he said, I showed that I can hang up here with big leaguers. And I believe that is 100% accurate, because no, spring training numbers aren't everything, but they can mean something to prospects like him. And if he goes down to Double-A and he's hitting balls like he just did yesterday, I can't imagine it will be that long before he's in Omaha. And after that, I can't imagine it'll be much longer until he's in Kansas City. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, check out the Locked On Fantasy Baseball Podcast with hosts Dominic Martino and Matthew Ane. MLB Fantasy Draft season is here. Be the most informed fan and set yourself up for a league win. Find Locked On Podcasts on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, we'll try to bring you a Mailbag Friday, so get all your questions in. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.